Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to this segment of Coach Gurbani's a-sabad-a-day. The recitation is from Maj Mahalla Panjama. Ot pot sevak sangarata, prabh pratpale sevak sukhdata, पानी पखा पीसों सेवक कै, ठाकुर ही का आहर जियो। काट सिलक प्रभ सेवा लाया, हुक्म साहिब का सेवक मन पाया। सोई कमावै जो सब भावै, सेवक अंतर बाहिर माहर जियो। तू दाना ठाकुर सब बिद जानै, ठाकुर के सेवक हर रंग मानै। जो किछ ठाकुर का सो सेवक का, सेवक ठाकुर ही संग जाहर जियो। अपने ठाकुर जो पहराया, बहुर न लेखा पुछ बुलाया। तिस सेवक के नानक कुर्बानी, जो गहर गंभीरा गहुर जियो। अपने ठाकुर जो पहराया, बहुर न लेखा पुछ बुलाया। तिस सेवक कै नानक कुर्बानी, जो गहर गंभीरा गहुर जियो। Let's take this from the top. Oth poth sevak sangarata, prabh pratpale sevak sukhdata, pani pakha piso sevak hai, ठाकुर ही का आहर जियो. My master, says the fifth Guru, is the warp and woof of my life. Its eternal wisdom looks after me and gives me comfort. I serve the Master by serving the cherished devotees. Thakur ka hi ahar jiyo. I bring them water, I fan them, and I grind grain to feed them. Pani pakha pison sevak ke. And the Prabh wisdom cuts the noose of my bondage and places me in its service. Kaat silak prabh seva laya. The Master's wish is pleasing to the servant. Hukum Sahib ka sevak man paya. The servant devotee knows the Master's wish and skillfully molds himself or herself accordingly. Soi kamave jo sahib pave, sevak antar bahir mahar jiyo. You are the all-knowing wisdom, he goes on. The servant devotee enjoys the bliss of being with the Master. A servant is identified by the Master. The servant is the custodian of the Master. Those whom the Master honors are not called to give an accounting. Says Nanak, I submit myself to those devotees who have achieved a deep and profound understanding. Now in this passage, there are two discernible takeaways that we can imbibe. And both of these center around the relationship of the individual with the creative being, with the Karta. In the first instance, we find that the individual and the creative are being seen as inextricably woven together, like the warp and woof form the weave of a pattern. Oth poth sevak sangarata. The term oth poth refers to the yarn used in weaving and knitting and its direction, lengthwise and widthwise. And it's being used here as an illustration of how inextricably woven the relationship is between the creative being, the creator, and the creation. It cannot be separated without unwinding the very fabric of creation, because you would have to unwind the yarn to actually separate the two. So it is a similar relationship. The second is the model of a slave and master relationship. Now, this has been used frequently in Gurbani, and in this passage, the Karta is being addressed as Sahib and Thakur, both meaning a master, a lord. And the Guru says, A servant is identified by the master. Sevak Thakur hi sang zahir jiyo. That is to say, the identity of the servant is inextricably linked to that of the master, and that the servant is also the custodian of the master. Jo kich Thakur ka, so sevak ka. So this is very significant, not only because they're inextricably wound together. So the inference that we can draw from this is that our individual existence is a matter of mutual recognition. And two, that our self-consciousness and self-awareness can arise only by seeing ourselves in relationship with the world around us. And it is in the context of this relationship that we strive for meaning, that we strive for dignity, that we try to establish ourselves in the world. And now creation is nothing more than the Creator manifested. It follows then that creation is indeed the master, because that's where the Creator is manifested. So when the individual is socialized, it establishes boundaries, and the individual really comes to recognize itself as just one object in a universe of infinite number of objects. In other words, it established the fact that the individual is not really the center of the universe, and that it must, in the scheme of things, submit to a collective will, which ultimately is hukam. But it is in its limitedness and dependence that enables the slave to recognize its independence in being a thing. It is only on the scaffolding of this limitation can humans aspire to reach beyond themselves. But what happens is the persistence of a self-centered will, haume, always lurks in the background, because it too is primal in its origin. It comes with us, and it has to be trained, it has to be transformed to where it recognizes its role as a slave. That is to say, one that does not have an independent existence. That is what a slave is. Our existence is dependent on the network around us. We are connected with our past history through our DNA, through our memories, through collective memories. We are connected to our family network. We have friends, so on, so forth. We live in a society. So in other words, we do not live in a vacuum. And so it is this structure of which we are a part. We have no independent existence. And the master, so therefore hukam, which is the master, has really brought forth a child, if you will, a slave, for the execution of its purpose. Creative power, hukam, is omnipotent, and it exerts its parental or master control, if you will, through death. We know that. But it gives us a brief period on earth. So the slave is given a brief period on earth during which the creative master endows the slave with its own powers. Jo kich Thakur ka, so sevak ka. Sevak Thakur hi sang zahir jiyo. So the gift of sight and insight, the gift of knowledge, the gift of discernment of good and evil, the capacity of judgment, the freedom to know, to examine, to imagine, to be creative. To humans alone has this endowment been given. And so it is a moment of opportunity, of freedom, which we should celebrate. And that is what the fifth Nanak here is saying, that he honors that particular life in which these capacities have been developed and used for the betterment of humanity. In other words, in the service of humanity. Apne Thakur jo pehraya, bhorna lekha puch bulaya, tis sevak ke nanak kurbani. Adoration, sacrifice, submission. Who? So gehar gambir gahor jiyo. Who has grasped the imperceptible, the profound, the deep, the unfathomable through Guru wisdom. With those thoughts, until the next time, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.